Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech for Everyone podcast. My name is Harrison Painter, your host, and my co host will be joining me in just a moment. We're going to change things up this week. We're going to bring on our first guest to interview. I'm running tight deadlines here. We did this interview Friday. It is Sunday night. I'm actually grilling out right now. I'm multitasking, but I want to make sure that this podcast, this video gets up on Monday morning. So our special guest, our first guest this week, is Scott McCorkle. Now, Scott's been in tech for over 3 decades. He was part of the ExactTarget Salesforce acquisition, I believe probably the biggest or one of definitely the biggest tech acquisitions that ever happened in Indianapolis. And he's currently the CEO of Metaimpact. And this is an incredible organization. They're focused on solving big problems, and we're going to be talking about that in the interview. All right, well, that's it for the introduction. I got to get over here and finish grilling. Let's get to the interview.
Tech for Everyone keeps you in the race.
Scott, I've always been a great admirer of yours. And one of the things I love of to kind of travel the country at times is I'll run into someone and I'll say how I'm from Indiana. And inevitably we'll get to a conversation where they'll say, I know so-and-so. And there's someone who's absolutely knocking it out of the park. And, they're from a small town in Indiana. And I loved hearing those stories. And then maybe you can tell a little bit about where you're from.
Yeah, well, John, thanks for having me. And Harrison, I really appreciate being part of your content. So the fourth smallest county in Indiana is Rush County, population 16,000, and born and raised, and have been in Indiana my entire adult life. Traveled the world, kind of many trips off to the west and back from the east and vice versa with IBM, Salesforce, a number of tech companies. And I just really appreciate just the upbringing that I had and the work ethic and just a belief that I could do or be anything from this small little place in Indiana. And the family homestead is still there. And I enjoy as my release just being in that environment. And yeah, John, I'm a big fan of the small roots.
That's good. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about the values that it put in you. Maybe as you've kind of been building different organizations, maybe talk a little bit about ExactTarget a little bit, and particularly around the people and the talent that you run into, and then kind of where that may have streamed into Metaimpact, or how you look at people and how you hire them, and does those values come into play, or how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, there is something about just the spirit of doing things and getting things done and being part of a team. And we say all the time how much people matter. That's really true. It's the foundation of everything. And the way a team works together is just so important. With ExactTarget, I always felt like if we were a furnace, our efficiency rating would be like 97%. We did very little other than what needed to be done to move the company forward. There was little wasted heat through some escaping of the efficiency of the system. And I think that was a special experience. Culture is interesting. I think you can certainly be intentional with your goals for culture, but you can't will culture to exist. It's really the exhaust that comes from decision making, dealing with issues and problems. And I can remember a whole lot going wrong in those early days of ExactTarget, and we were pushing boundaries. We were doing things we'd never done before, and there'd be times when the company would get a little upset about like something going wrong, and it's like if we want to stifle innovation, then what we do is start to get mad at people for making mistakes, or look at punishment for things that we just didn't know how to do at the time. So you just have to have people prepared to take risks, accept that not everything's going to work. Now, being competent or not competent, that's a different matter. But a competent team pressing into the unknown will make mistakes, and you have to embrace that. And I think we did just really an excellent job of that. And I say job, it was really the culture that supported this risk taking. And I think that was a big part of that company's success.
And let's talk about your current passion, because it moved from small town Indiana to building ExactTarget to acquisition and the huge story there, to now really focused on a lot of very meaningful things that you're doing as far as the Mission 41K Impact Network. You're working with economic development, racial equality, sustainability, workforce development. So share the vision of Metaimpact, because this is that's a big vision.
Yeah, well, Harrison, thank you for asking. And there's a fun founding story that goes back to Salesforce, where the C-suite access that we had at Salesforce was just terrific. ExactTarget had that a little bit, but nowhere near Salesforce. And as I spent time with many C-suites in many industries, asking about their view of the future, problems they were focusing on, it struck me that it was a completely different category of problem that the Salesforce suite of products addressed. Very sophisticated products, and obviously a tremendously successful company, but generally speaking to the routine transactional workflow that an organization needs to automate to run its business. But when you talk to C-suites, they often press into an industry scale of problem, something much larger than the current footprint of their companies, really 0 to 1 kind of thinking. And I just found that to be a gap in how enterprise software worked. And this would be 2013 to 2015, 2016 timeframe. And there was a very impactful stretch where I met with several healthcare companies simultaneously. One was a manufacturer, another was a provider, another retail pharmacy. And they all said exactly the same thing, which was to solve healthcare's grand challenges, we all need a seat at the same table. Not one company or even one sector of the industry can solve affordability, accessibility, and equity in healthcare. It needs to be every actor together at the same table. The problem, there's no table. And that was super impactful to think, where do multiple stakeholders go when there needs to be contributions from all toward some shared goal? And that was the founding vision of Metaimpact. And as we pressed into that, very much thinking commercial entities as our focal point, well, those commercial entities have multiple stakeholders in their communities or other efforts that speak to the intersection of commercial and social value. So that found us working with Georgia Tech and Climate Action and JP Morgan Chase and Equity. And there's this wonderful nexus of nonprofits, government agencies, and commercial enterprises that are focused on these grand challenges. And there's a commercial element, but there's a big social impact element to that as well. And that is where we find ourselves at Metaimpact focused. And I'll have to say, it's been the most fulfilling evolution of a startup I've ever been part of, to find our way into these very important causes.
So I do want to touch on this question, because I think this is a valuable question for anybody listening to this. When you talk about bringing in all of these different groups, different stakeholders, different people, we all know every city is the same. Every kind of group is the same. What is the secret sauce to getting people to work together? Because that's always a huge challenge. You know, you say you don't have a table, the table's being built, you get people at the table. How do you get them working together?
Yeah, there's a good amount of thought leadership here that would focus on the idea of a backbone, a convener, that there really has to be an entity taking a leadership role to create that carrier signal that brings everyone else forward. And that backbone is helping initiate a common agenda. What are we trying to accomplish together? What do we need to measure? How will we measure it? What will we do to course correct? And we want to support every individual view and responsibility, that's essential, and we can talk more about that. But we need to create a collective impact from those individual views, and there needs to be leadership, and there could be very natural conveners. I mentioned Georgia and climate action. Georgia Tech is the convener of Georgia's sustainability efforts across their commercial sector, led from a group of educators and professionals in the Racy Anderson Center for Sustainability, which is part of their Schuler College of Business. And there could be non-natural conveners. And what I mean by that, there could be organizations that act as a catalyst, and they need to really build a consensus because they perhaps just don't fall into a traditional role of building coalitions. And those could be a variety of organizations. But ultimately, there needs to be that leadership of a backbone organization that brings everyone together.
For me, as I've watched this organization over the last few years, I would say about 3 years ago, I heard you talk, and probably an issue with my own maturity or understanding, I was kind of struggling. I couldn't make the connection. And then somewhere last year, I think I saw you speak another time, and maybe it was the moment it just popped in my head that I could actually see the connection and the potential that I know I want to be part of pushing into Metaimpact. Is I feel like a lot of times we spend so much time on the symptoms that we never actually get to the cause of the real problems. And the light bulb moment for me last year was all of a sudden I started to see how it was all connected. And I said, well, if this is all connected, we may actually be able to see the real causes, and everybody's at the table to point the energy at the cause instead of all the symptom. I think about you earlier talking about 98% efficiency or something, and that's because you are always working on that was most important and most impactful, and that's the part that really gets me excited. Is finally we might be able to actually see the causes and really direct the solution, and just because we spend a lot of time and effort on symptoms, and that always just seems to amplify over time.
John, that word see is really important because these large abstract systems, and we are speaking of a system, is impossible to see. We need to find a way to visualize it. And that is the first value we find our platform offering, just the visualization of all the ecosystem members and who's working on what. We think of it as a venue of discovery, just to be able to get our arms around some part of a large effort and all the different connections within it. And the thing about symptoms and problems, rarely does a problem appear where it was created. The problems typically show up far downstream from some artifact of the system that isn't working in an optimal way. So that automatically, just by definition, puts us into this multi-stakeholder framework, because we have organizations wrestling with problems, far later than when they were created, and there are other entities that could be acting in the system to solve those problems, but before they happen. And there could be within the urgency of many of these efforts, just things that while symptoms have such high urgency, you have to address them. So yes, we want to solve or even dissolve the problem, but we got to treat the symptoms because there's such a urgent impact to it. And then just where does one go to do that? It's not just a communication challenge. We're communicating in a shared space here. When we're finished, it'll go away. We need to have a digital persistence to these large scale efforts that exist beyond any single stakeholder, but then respects all the independence of each stakeholder. And that's an abstract idea. We recognize that, but as we start to get traction with now about 3,000 organizations in our platform, it does create some aha moments.
Wow. So let me ask you this. When Scott wakes up in the morning, what is that? Because you're working on a lot of different problems, but what's the one thing that you really would like to leave as a legacy, that this is either the problem I solved or I at least moved the ball forward enough to see a difference?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I can't help but reflect on the realities of a startup, because that like first wake up 10 seconds, 30 seconds gathering yourself can often be filled with what word do I want to use here? Sheer dread, it's just, and all the problems and demands and just weight of a startup is a very real thing. And I just like to say that because I've talked to lots of other individuals starting companies that are almost afraid to express that view. It's like, gosh, am I the only one that feels this? Because I see all these other people creating all these great companies, and something must be wrong with me because I wake up in the morning filled with dread. And that's just in my experience, the recognizing just the scope of difficulty to create a company from nothing. So when I gather myself, which then is the most often, it just that feeling goes away, and then you get it at the work, and it's the interconnectedness that most excites me. It When we start to speak to the scale of problems that we're discussing, and if I go to my healthcare example, that intertwines and entangles with issues of sustainability and economic development and workforce. There's a interconnectedness that we need to embrace when it comes to large scale problem solving. And if an organization were to go off, and there are very, very, very many organizations trying to affect workforce, and that's terrific. But if we are trying to build a platform to support the efforts of those organizations, well, we can't leave out economic development, because that's where housing is where jobs go home to sleep, and we can't leave out transportation. And then we need to think about the sustainability of how we have people moving about, that brings workforce and economic development together. So the interconnectedness, I'll use that word one more time, is the most fascinating thing that we see happening as we build this effort. And yeah, there's fun paths to go down with, like, just highlighting here for everyone. When we say network interconnectedness, we mean that very literally. So let me just kind of quickly highlight that what we're building is not a traditional B2B SaaS application. It is a network. It is a network of networks. The folks at Georgia Tech will say, Metaimpact, you're like our own private LinkedIn, except you're about doing and learning, not people just connecting. You're actually the embodiment of our effort. So it is a network, to highlight that.
I love you sharing the what I like to, for me, I would just call it the struggle. That kind of that fear. Sometimes I know there's times where I've kind of woken up saying, I'm not sure how I'm going to get out of this situation. But I actually, John Weschler is an individual here in Indianapolis as well. I was with him the other day. He had a great program he called FailFest. And we were talking about bringing that back, right? Celebration of failure. And to me, it's not, I've always felt failure is a point in time, not necessarily an individual. But to me, I have found when I really start to fall in love with the problem I'm solving, then the struggle is where the great life is. It's like I start looking at the problem differently, and I'm saying, okay, what kind of struggle am I going to take on today? And I find that the things that have been most rewarding in my life is when I've struggled with other people to do something great. And it's interesting, you probably can think back to ExactTarget and other times that you mentioned earlier. The great struggle is when you start laughing and you start, and the stories that come out of it. And I try to use that fuel to bring it back to the struggles I have today, to put it in perspective that it's just a point in time, and we're going to come together. We're going to struggle together through it. To me, suffering is when you're alone. And I think when you can just make sure you have the right team and struggle and attack things, these truly are the great this is the where the real life is. So it's amazing to watch you and others go through it. I just fall in love with it.
Yeah, the irony of it, and it is a struggle, is once a company then gets to the other side, you kind of look back on those early days as your favorite part, because then there's all kinds of other things that are different kinds of problems that happen later. And just that, yeah, getting through it. And it's interesting. We're recording this on a Friday, and it's like, where did the week go? It just like time is moving so fast, and I take that as a good sign of just being like mentally just connected into the problem solving and trying to make things work, because it just does. It warps time. It just really is kind of a emotionally and mentally immersing.
Well, let's talk a bit about, because of that time. We all have the same amount of time, even though it feels very, very limited. And time is moving faster and faster as technology keeps moving faster and faster. Let's talk about a passion subject of mine, and that's artificial intelligence, because a lot of us are using it to get work done faster, to save time, to be more efficient. Where do you see artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to Metaimpact and the big problems that you're solving? How do you see AI playing a role over the next, I don't know, 1 to 3 years? I know AI is kind of hard to predict in that fashion, but where do you see it kind of playing its biggest role here at the early stages?
I mean, I think there's a whole host of very specific things one could point to in the benefit humanity in profound ways. It could be protein folding from Google's models, or there's other uh, very specific applications. The generalness of what's happening with all the advancements of large language models and generative AI, and really approaching general artificial intelligence, which we are, I think we don't know. And a point that I like to highlight here along the side of the positive productivity, all the things that would be in the pro column. I do think we need policy discussions on what happens if this evolves to the point of mass job disruption, or impacts to society in the negative column. And that's not to say that there isn't all this positive. There is, but I personally think glossing over the potential negatives just by saying it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. What if it isn't? And I believe it's appropriate and okay to ask those questions. And I believe, just in the AI topic broadly, that we should be embracing the spectrum of outcomes to talk through what this means for everyone. But to the more immediate gains of productivity, I think you're going to see just the ability to manage a mass of knowledge and have that applied with human-like intelligence in a way that is going to be a boost to productivity like we've never seen before. And from productivity comes wealth. And now I think we need to be mindful of how that wealth applies and creates equitable opportunities, back to the policy matters. But maybe I'll kind of try to end my inadequate answer here by just suggesting that what's happening has not happened before. It isn't like the next internet. It isn't like automating the Wall Street trading floor and 2,000 traders needing to find something else to do. It isn't like any of that. It's without precedent, and we don't know what will happen.
Will it take more jobs or create more jobs, in your opinion?
I think there's near term, long term, medium term. I think to my point, what I would like to have just a foundational statement is that if there are those who believe it will create more jobs, then we should have that as part of our policy discussion. If there are those who believe it will destroy more jobs, then we should welcome that point of view into the policy discussion. We should not take either of those views out of the spectrum of potential outcomes because we don't know. So what then I would say about that is, what if it does destroy more jobs? What if it does destroy jobs on the order of tens of millions, not hundreds of thousands? We should have answers to that, or we should think about, well, what would one do? What would we do as a society with that? That maybe that's good in many ways. Maybe it creates periods of literal civil unrest, but once we manage through that, then we find ourselves in a better place. Or that there's just if you looked at workforce studies now, that would show tens of millions of jobs not being filled. So what happens when AI is able to fill these needed roles in ways that are creating productivity and benefit back to all of society? So I'll just say this from my own just personal place with this, is just, I believe we all have standing to ask the questions on either end of the question you're asking, or to answer the question on either end of that.
What I love about your response, and I'm kind of processing this in real time, is I'm kind of a person of abundance, and I'm always leaning, where's the upside of this? But I do like how you say, you know what, if it is going to be a downside, let's have a plan. Let's not walk in flat-footed and deal with all of that usually comes with that. Have a plan. Say, well, if we're going to go down this route, then what are we going to do with that? We're going to upskill. We're going to do this. Be prepared to make the investments and have a plan to address it, versus just trying to hide behind it. So I really like that perspective.
And isn't this a lot like what Andrew Yang has talked about really for over a decade now? If you have 30% of the workforce displaced, isn't universal basic income one of the only kind of real solutions that might, I don't know if it would work, but what other options would you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good response to the debate. So there would be many of us and places that would have been resistance to some of those ideas, just like but then you look to this future, and I think, wow, that sure seems like a probable outcome, or a potential direction here. I don't know the answer, but to the point we're discussing here, I think we need to start with a recognition of a range of outcomes and an admission that we don't know. So because of that, we should not rule out any potential part of this. And I think that applies even to the more existential discussions and safeguards around a machine becoming sentient, or artificial intelligence reaching a general intelligence. I think it's okay to ask those questions. And I think in the near term, we're going to see developments that make where we are now look like just very, very, very basic. Like exponential growth is hard for the mind to grasp. What things look like a year, 2 years, 5 years, when things are advancing exponentially. They are, and we should begin just to have a more open policy discussion, in my view.
What do you think about that, John? That's something you and I haven't really talked much about, right? We do focus more on the positive of everything, but what do you feel about a solution to that challenge?
I don't know if I look at it for, someone asked me the other day, where do you think this is going to be in 6 months or in 5 years? I felt a little flat-footed because it's changing so quickly that I have to keep re-envisioning where I think the next steps are. For me, I look at where can we get value from it today, and when I look at Metaimpact and some of the things that we're doing in AI from an education and training standpoint, it's really what is the value that we can get today that might position us to capture wherever it's going to go. And one of the things that I have seen over and over again, and maybe Scott, you might be able to speak to this, but I've done a lot of employee surveys and challenges with leadership and all these issues and things of organizations struggling, and it usually comes down to communication. And one of the things I think the opportunity for us right now, and I know it's been a help for me, is to kind of use some of these tools to be a better orchestrator of my intent and how I want to communicate things. A lot of times I know we've struggled with communication. I mean, every time you ever, either a marriage or a business, always it's communication is a problem. Communication is a problem. And so I just think that some of these tools is the great opportunity is to capture the ability to be a better orchestrator of your intention and communication. And I just see when people have been able to get the tool and do that, I just feel that that's going to be the opportunity. The other thing that makes me feel a little bit better about some of the negative is it is people like Scott and organizations like Metaimpact who are going to have to lead the dialogue or lead the policy or bring that platform to the table to inform us. That's the part I get excited is, wow, can I communicate? Can I come from a place of data that we can see more than just what I see in my little world that I might be in, but to see the whole thing? That's the part I think is going to be key for us to capture this.
I love it. And let's close with this because I think this is a great question. Scott, what advice can you give people right now? How can we prepare for the future? Because the future right now is very uncertain, economically, politically, all those things. Technology is moving at a pace that we've never seen it move before. And we do have a large chunk of the population that does have fear about what's happening. We have another chunk of the population that's excited about what's happening. So, what advice could you give people really on just how to future proof themselves and truly prepare for what's coming?
I think there's just a level of connectedness we have with our fellow citizens and just members of the human race, kind of writ large, that is trying to advance and solve problems and to be engaged and active in that in really regional capacities and local efforts. It's just that there's just so much to engage with to try to help things and help people and to just speaking of, I think all of us find ourselves having started and grown businesses and having enjoyed a degree of professional success. And how do we help others do that? How do we create opportunities and even breaks and give people chances? And so I think just the structuring of how we all engage, it just feels like that's always been important, but it's just more important now. And from those activations come the ability to respond faster to things that are different or change as we move forward. So I think there's just I think of it as a level of connectivity that we need across the society. And I might even throw in a dash of civility to that, just where we need to be able to have these discussions and agree and disagree, have different point of views, but have something or some collection of things that we can align on and agree that we want to make these better. And I think that there is leadership to your very first question. Well, how's that just going to happen? There need to be individuals and organizations that take leadership roles, and we won't agree with all the perspectives from any of that. But if there can be some underlying foundation of just, it is better to have a job than to not have a job. Well, then let's help people get jobs. There's a whole lot of problems that are solved by those three letters, job, and let's help. And well, what happens if it all, comes crumbling down? Like, well, that hasn't happened yet. So along the way, let's help people get a job. So we have to control what we can control.
Yeah, and John, you've built, a big chunk of your career on that, right? Helping people get trained and and have jobs. And even with this AI Fusion conference, which Scott is going to be on our lunch panel for that, you're in alignment with what Scott said, because we're not live streaming this first event, and this is the first AI conference of its kind, definitely in Indiana, probably the nation. But share a little bit about why you're not live streaming this, why we made that decision, and how it falls in line with what Scott just said.
Yeah, and I'll just go kind of go off of what Scott just said. We could have streamed it, we could have done all these things, but we were like, how do you build a community? And so we said, with the first time, let's make sure we get everybody in the same room. I kind of feel like with AI, and you've already seen this, what you hear and see, I'm not sure if you can trust that in the future and what you've seen in the past. And I almost feel like a lot of times the connectedness of the internet and all the things that we talk about has made us more connected than ever, and people feel isolated more than ever. And so one of my aspirations is maybe AI will force us to seek more authentic, genuine interactions, which might be in person, so that we can kind of experience the full thing that we as humans get. And so when we looked at this conference, I said, let's not stream it, and let's make them make the investment of getting in a room with people together and being curious about this new tool and learning and debating and understanding it. One of the things, 1150 Academy used to be 100% in person, then we were 100% online. It was amazing to watch that our outcomes declined online. So I just think it's the opportunity for us to start to, let's lean a little bit back and get more of just connecting humans and humanity. That always seems to be a good thing to do. So that's what we're doing. And we may do some other stuff later on with some streaming, but let's get together in a room and just the full human experience.
Yeah, I think it's ironic, right? When we all started in tech and these businesses, right? The focus was always worldwide. Now we're connected everywhere. And somehow over the years, right, we've come back to realize the importance is we need to start at the local level. We need to build that table where people can physically sit in that room together and create and build chemistry and really get to know each other in a way that it's very challenging to do on Zoom, right? So how important do you think it is for that physical connection? Because 2020 put us in a Zoom world, and we have to get back to that real connection in the room. And I would assume that you would put that at what level of importance for going local now?
As an introverted tech person who took some comfort in the Zoom phase of what we went through, have just come to really understand that the connection is essential. It doesn't mean that we can't have the virtual connections, but that starting local and sharing activity to some effort, some moving something forward, big or small. I just think that's just the fabric of society that will get us to whatever is happening next.
Well, any closing thoughts, John, or closing questions before we come to an end?
Actually, I want to thank Scott and his participation today and his friendship and just how much appreciation to watch what he's done in his career and what his organization is doing. We need these things, right? We need to see folks like himself and what they're doing and to kind of lead others and set the stage for the next generation. So thank you, Scott, for being part of this and being who you are. And thank you for being part of our community.
John, it was my pleasure. I really appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you so much. It's definitely been an honor. And this is awesome. I love it. We're going to have you back on soon for sure.
Well, Harrison, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hear the call, join the wave, get the tech insights that you crave. As AI evolves and reshapes the space, tech for everyone keeps you in the race. Tech for everyone, clear and vast. Shape your future in each podcast. Practical insights, tools at your command. Tech made simple right in your hand. Hit subscribe, catch the vibe. Tech for everyone, join the tribe. Each episode a new quest begins. With Tech for everyone, everybody wins.